Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. So I'm Jose Talavera. I'm a solutions architect with Instana. And we are coming to you live from Cloud Expo Europe. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in London due to our coronavirus. Which didn't allow me to travel, and hence I had to stay here in Madrid. But anyway, thank you very much for joining our demo. Today we will be discussing the AWS Lambda native tracing with Instana. And so the plan is we're going to start with 15-20 minutes, okay, of demo, and then another 10 minutes of Q&A or whatever is needed. Overall, it should take about 30 minutes. Okay, so it's just a small session where I'm planning to show you exactly how we do with Lambda and how we used to do before. Now, I hope that you can see my screen. And by the way, you are all muted. So if you need to say anything, make any comment or question, please put them on the chat channel that you have here. If there is something, if you cannot see properly my screen, please let me know. Okay. So normally you should see my screen. And for those that are not familiar with Instana, I'm going to do just a quick high-level overview on Instana, what we do as a company. And then from there, I'm going to do a quick deep dive into the Lambda native tracing, which is the topic of today. Okay, so first of all, Instana is an APM solution, right? It's about monitoring applications. And we do that with 100+ different technologies and in a unique way. Okay, we have one single agent. That agent needs to be deployed at the host level. And it's going to go through, as soon as it's installed, it's going to go through a discovery process. It's going to detect every single runtime application process running on that host, and it's going to automatically instrument. So basically, we try to instrument everything. So, and we do that automatically. So we automate the APM. That's what could be the slogan of Instana. Now, once we have deployed the agent, the Instana agent, and we start collecting metrics and traces, that is what we will see. All that you are going to see here on Instana, it's actually generated automatically. You don't need to configure anything. You don't need to set up, change anything manually. Everything is automatic. And as part of that, you will get things like infrastructure metrics that you can see here on the left-hand panel. Obviously, as an application monitoring solution, we will collect application metrics in a unique way, actually. And any layer in between infrastructure and application. And by the way, we try to be the best in class for Kubernetes monitoring and all the other distributions like OpenShift, the cloud versions of Kubernetes as well, AKS, EKS, Rancher, and all these other flavors of Kubernetes in the cloud. Now, obviously, all this is back-end monitoring, right? If you look at your application, but what happens with the front end? Well, we will monitor that as well. We did another session yesterday about end user monitoring. If you want more details, we do have a recording that we could definitely share with you, and that is going to be all in here in websites. So things like page loads, on load times by percentiles, geographic metrics and things like that. It's all in here. But obviously, monitoring is not only about metrics, it's also about traces, right? And that's what we will collect and be able to analyze in this analytics view. one unique thing from Instana in this sense is that we capture 100% of the traces. There is no sampling, no thresholding at all. Okay, we capture that. Obviously, we cannot store that, especially for the SaaS version. We cannot store that for forever. That's why we do have a data retention policy, but we'll keep the data, or we keep the traces for quite some time. And last but not least, obviously, we don't want our users, our customers, to be staring at dashboards all day long. And that's why we have those events, right? And that's probably the most used area of Instana, especially when you do troubleshooting. It's where you will start, definitely. And on events, you will see issues, incidents, changes, so that you could quickly understand what happened, right? What is the sequence of events when there is an outage, and will definitely help you to diagnose what happened first, but also what is the root cause analysis, or what's causing your bottlenecks on your applications whenever there is a performance degradation. Okay, so now obviously we monitor, as I mentioned, we monitor hundreds of different technologies, right? But today we are just going to focus on the Lambda monitoring. Before we go into traces, I just want to briefly show you what we can monitor in terms of metrics. And here you see we have an AWS region. And in here we can see our availability zone. And we can see here a number of Lambda functions, right? You can probably identify that with the icon. And we see that this Lambda function has got here 11 versions, right? You can, if you zoom in, you can actually see the different versions, like this version 6, this versions 15, right? You can, by just clicking on each of them, you could go into the details, right? You get like the ARN, revision ID, name, runtime handler, things that are definitely useful for the techies and the people that are actually working with those Lambdas. Now, we have a bunch of different services, cloud native services here. I'm going to pick this one, the demo trigger, okay? And what do we see here? Well, we have a couple of versions, 2 versions here. And then we will see the service. That's something we will go afterwards. But now, first of all, let me show you something. It's from here, we could go into the dashboard. And here's where we get the meat, right? Here's where we get the important stuff. And obviously, we have 2 versions, so we need to pick the versions that we want to explore. And in this case, we are going to see the latest. Obviously, the latest is the one that is going to have more activity recently. So I'm going to pick the latest one, and we can start seeing some metrics like invocations, durations, errors, throttles, that letter errors. So a bunch of different a bunch of different metrics that we collect, and we'll show you that over time. Obviously, you can go back in time up to 30 months, right, and just pick exactly what time frame you're interested on, and from here we can definitely go into the service, right? So I'm sure that there's good information in terms of infrastructure metrics, but you should be interested on things like more like what is the application running on that Lambda function doing, right? If we go into the service, right? So it's a service running on this Lambda function, and we see that is a Node.js. Okay, that's great. It's a Node.js service called demo trigger, and from here we'll get high-level metrics. If you are not familiar with the Google Dapper methodology, we are, as a company, Instana is monitoring 3 key metrics: the invocation rate or calls, the erroneous calls, okay, and the latency. And with those 3 metrics, we should be able to understand the state and the performance of any service or application. And that's what Instana is using, okay? That's what you will see across the interface of Instana. Now, this is a high-level summary, right? We can see what is the health of that service. We see the number of calls, erroneous calls, everything over time, correlation, automatic correlation with infrastructure issues and changes. You can also see the flow. That's pretty interesting, right? So you can see exactly who is calling who. So you see this demo trigger function is actually calling another function here, another one here, and you could go with downstream and see who's going to be called next, and so forth. If you are interested more into the different endpoints, you can see them in here. See high-level metrics. If there is or if there are any messages, erroneous messages, you will see them in here. But that is all more if you want to get into the nitty-gritty. But obviously, what we are all interested in is more into the issues, right? So before we move into the issues and how to analyze different traces, let me show you something that is pretty mind-blowing, I would say, because if you go into the what Instana calls an application perspective, is just an easy way to group different services, right? In this case, we created a perspective for the Lambda, AWS Lambda, and here we have a number of functions, and pretty interesting to see how those functions, they are all interacting and how they are communicating. And we show that automatically into this diagram that you can see, which is first is interactive, and secondly is auto-maintain, or if there is something that changes, it will be automatically shown here. So we can see a number of different events, different Lambda functions, like this one, which is calling an unspecified Lambda function, Node.js function, another Node.js service, and this is a PostgreSQL database, right? And you can see exactly that this one, for instance, is having some issues. From here, we could go inspect that issue, or we could go into the dashboard or the flow that we saw before. But that is a nice, easy way to understand who is calling who, and how to quickly dive into any issues. Before we go into the issue, I would like to show you how to go into the traces. So if we go again back to this demo trigger event, we are looking at what happened in the last 7 days, right? And you have this blue button here, analyze calls, where you could go there, click there, and in here we will get every single call grouped by endpoint. Okay, we have one single endpoint. If we remove that grouping, we will see the list of all the 10,000 calls that were made by this demo trigger service. As you probably realize, we have got this pre-populated filter that is created because we came from the application side into the traces, and we could see the traces. Obviously, there will be fewer than calls because a trace is a group of calls. But in here, we will look at the different calls. Okay, so if we go into the calls, we can click on randomly on any of them just to show you some of them. Before I show you this erroneous call, I want to show you more complete trace. So this is CloudWatch event. The interesting bit here is how Instana is going to show you that and how you can quickly understand what's happening and what's slowing you down. Okay, so we see on this, we see that on this trace we have 8 calls. Okay, the high level latency of that trace is going to be almost 1 second, and we see different in blue you will see the HTTP calls, right? So right now, if we click in one of these calls, we'll get exactly, okay, the demo trigger, which is the Lambda function we were looking before. We see all the different HTTP parameter, the stack trace as well in here, so you can look at the code, but also the infrastructure. Okay, so you can see exactly what Lambda function has triggered that call, and what is the destination. So we can see the destination is this get items endpoint on this service. We can see again that it's a Lambda function with multiple attributes, and again we can from here quickly go back into the infrastructure. So just so you identify what link is that, so we could go back into the infrastructure to understand what happened with that service, with that Lambda function. Now, if you have also in your trace, you have 8 subcalls, right? So in orange, you will see the database calls. So you will see here what is the query statement, again the stack trace, and we can see, okay, who made that call, right? So you see that that was a call that was made to this Lambda function. Okay, so that is pretty interesting if you want to understand, because that is the details, right? But normally you will be interested on the performance of the of the trace, or every single call within the trace. So you can use this waterfall view. Okay, you could use the list view with all the different calls that were made, but also that we have got this tree view where you can see who is calling who and how long it takes. This one is taking, this post for instance is taking 109 milliseconds and is triggering another database call to this service, this specific service. Okay, so that is a quick analysis on how to understand things that are happening within a Lambda trace. Let me go back in here. Let me see if we still have an issue. Demo trigger, inspect the issue. In here we can see, for instance, that we had an issue, right? So imagine that I'm just doing something else, another task, and then suddenly I get a Slack message telling me that I've got a problem with my Lambda functions, and that will be triggered by this issue. As you can see, we're in events. We automatically Instana trigger an issue, and it's actually a critical one. So probably it's good to have a look at that. If we click on this issue, what we'll see, well, first of all, we'll see that is happening on the demo trigger Lambda function or service, but specifically for the latest version. Okay, some details, like obviously is an erroneous call, so the rate of erroneous calls is too high. We can get some more details about what happened, right? And if you want to understand why that was triggered, you can go into the built-in event. And by the way, you obviously can change, right? That built-in event is for your organization or your team. It's not 50, but it's 52. You can always change that so you don't get bombarded with lots of issues, for instance. But if you want to inspect that, what happened, and try to understand what was the bottleneck, we get automatically shown here the metric, right? The metric in this case obviously is the erroneous calls, and we can see that there was a spike from 0% to 100%, and from here we could either go to see the service and what happened and what has changed over time, but also we could go into the analyze the traces. That is exactly what we did before. In this case, instead of taking that that trace with those 8 different calls, in this case we can see that this get items endpoint has triggered a 500, is having some issues, and trigger 500 status code. Hence the CloudWatch event had to trigger that erroneous call as well. Okay, so that is how you could troubleshoot. Obviously, you could go and see what happened with the logs, have a look at the the code or the stack trace, and usually this is gold dust for developers. With that, I'm going to stop here. Okay, I think I've done high level overview on the Lambda monitoring. So we started with infrastructure monitoring of Lambda functions. From there, we switched gears to how to monitor Lambda functions from an application perspective in terms of number of calls, errors, and latency. And from there, we could see how to analyze traces, how to have visibility into the number of calls between different Lambda functions and who is impacting other services. But also, in case of a bad behavior, misbehavior of one of our Lambda functions, we could trigger some events that could notify us automatically. So I hope that was useful. I'm gonna open up now for questions. I see already a question somewhere here, but not sure if you are already unmuted. If you want to type your questions on the chat, then great. So let me read the question. How do we extract the information related to delays, traces, etc.? Well, the way we do that is on your Lambda function, okay? In this case, in the AWS, when you are configuring the Lambda function, you probably know that you can add different layers. Well, one of the things you need to do is to add an Instana Lambda layer into your function, which could be done via the UI, the AWS UI, or programmatically. Okay, from the command line, it could be also done. As soon as you do that, you configure the backend, the Instana backend, and you should get all the traces, all the communications. Deploys the function behind some kind of proxy. Yeah, that's something we don't have a proxy in this case, but basically it's all done with this Instana Lambda layer. Hence, there shouldn't be any impact on the latencies. So just to answer the last question, the Instana Lambda layer shouldn't add any sort of latency. What it's doing is just to capture timings and sending those those metrics back into Instana with some further details, data, but definitely shouldn't impact the behavior or the performance of your application. Definitely not. Any other question? I have time. I'm just thinking if there is something else I wanted to show. Yeah, just to mention something. A little bit of the story of Lambda monitoring with Instana. So we used to have Lambda monitoring for a while. Okay, we were one of the first APM vendors to release some support to Lambda functions. At the beginning, it was with X-ray. Okay, there was some monitoring with X-ray, and obviously that was quite limited from a number of angles. First of all, it adds some costs, right? Because you need to pay AWS or Amazon for X-ray, which is not the case right now with this native monitoring of Lambdas. Obviously, with X-ray, you collect metrics, but there is nothing in terms of tracing. So all the tracing and troubleshooting that I've shown you here on the analytics view, that wasn't possible before. And so there is a number of, and also just to finish off, the third one would be to be able to identify every single version. So if you have 15 different versions for your Lambda function, we can actually see the performance of every single version of the functions. So that is always good in terms of comparing performances, see how it evolves, and make sure that you are using or analyzing the right version of your Lambda. So those are the main three benefits that we released recently with the new native Lambda monitoring. So with that, if there are no other questions, I'm happy to stop here. As always, you can go to the Instana website if you want to learn more about us, about Instana. I'm going to post as well on the chat a website where to learn more about Instana's technology. So lots of technical articles and documentation is in the docs of Instana. And if you want to give it a try, right? If you want to play with it, we do have a 2 weeks trial. It's on our website as well, but we should have got a pop-up message here. And feel free to play with Instana. If you need anything else, please let us know. Thank you very much. Bye bye, everyone.